Today I'm taking free household waste and I'm upcycling it into some beautiful high-end home decor for your garden. I'll be using some tin cans, some driftwood that washed up on the beach, and 2 wire hangers that were missing the hangers and the liners. I'm Alana from Upcycling NZ. Welcome to my channel. Let's upcycle. The tins are open at one end already, so I'm going to take a can opener and I'm going to open the other end, but I want to stop less than halfway around the tin. Once that opening is a nice clean cut around that side, I'll take a permanent marker and I'm just going to mark the sides where the cut ends. Then with a ruler I'm going to mark a line down the sides, and I've lined the end of the ruler up with the rim of the tin to ensure that that's a nice straight line. I've borrowed Pop's tin snips, and it's a bit hard to crack through the very rim of the tin, but once you get going it's quite soft to cut. The snips kept wanting to go on an angle, and although it didn't look like it, they ended up cutting straight. So I'll cut down the other side as well, and I recommend wearing gloves for this. I'm a sucker for punishment and I did not wear gloves and I did cut myself. Once you get through the other side you can just bend it back and it'll snap off. And I'll just draw a line from side to side and cut off the half circle at the bottom. I have some wire cutters handy, so I'll just clean up that sharp corner. I'll just put a piece of scrap board under this project to protect the table. I'll be mounting this on another board and I'm going to be using Jenga blocks. So I'm going to mark where I want those to go. The bottom of the tin is pretty rigid, but the 2 sides open up a little bit when you cut the can open. So that's where I'm going to secure the tin to the Jenga blocks. The blocks will be hidden inside the tin in the end. I'm marking both sides so I can see clearly what I'm doing. I've cut 2 tins rather than using 2 halves because I wanted them a little bit deeper to hold more soil for your plant. I'll be using a little nail to hammer into the side of these blocks once they're mounted on the board. So I'm punching 2 holes in each side at the ends with this nail. I'll be painting both tins in an acrylic exterior house paint in black, and this one looks dark brown but it actually dries black. I'm painting on a nice thick even layer with a chippy brush. I have to apologise for the cicadas in the background which have started up. I'll be doing something different with each of these tins. I'll put a second coat on the first tin once it's dry, and a little tip is to wrap your paintbrush in Glad Wrap, and that'll keep it nice and wet for when you're ready for your second coat. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to make a label for this tin, and I'm taking a piece of paper which is aged quite naturally. It's a bit like newsprint paper. It's lovely and thick, and with this little French stencil I'm going to apply it using the black paint, and I'll just masking tape that on. I'm using a stiff hard bristle brush for this, and I'm going to offload most of the paint. This is really important with paper as it's so absorbent it will bleed very easily. So my paintbrush is quite dry while I'm adding the paint, which I'm doing in a downward dabbing motion or stippling it on. That's turned out nicely, and I drew around the stencil before I taped it to the paper so that I can cut that out nicely. I'll decoupage that onto the tin, and I use a fairly stiff brush for this, and I'm just adding some PVA wood glue. You could use Mod Podge or any PVA glue for this. I got a little happy with the glue and I put a little bit much on, but I'll just spread that out and push all of the excess glue to one side for now. I'm checking for the centre, and I'll start to lay it from one side. As I'm pushing the paper down into the grooves and putting a layer of glue over the top, I'm also pushing out all of the air bubbles, and you'll see as I get to the other side it'll push out a whole lot of extra glue, and then I can use that to cover the rest of the paper. There's still some extra glue there on the side, so I'll just use a wet wipe and wipe back some of it. I love how this is looking already, but we've still got a wee ways to go with this one. The board I'm using washed up on the beach and it has some lovely rusty nails in it, and one end has been worn away by the sea. I'm just going to do a paint wash on this, so I'm using some acrylic paint in the colour French Vanilla. It was a little bit too yellow, so I've also added some acrylic white to that. And I've watered it down, and I'm just going to randomly spread that around the board, and then I'm going to take my Mr. Spray bottle and give it a really good spray and spread that paint out a little bit, but ensuring that a lot of that wood still shows through. The colour ties in with the label, and I'm going to use some antiquing wax to age the edges of the label. I do that with a little sponge, and I offload most of the antiquing wax, and then I dab and wipe it around the edges until I get the look that I'm going for. When the sponge is very dry of antiquing wax, I'll just rub it across the surface just to pick up those ridges ever so slightly. I think that's enough to make it look old and vintage. Then while I still have the antiquing wax out, I'm going to age the edges of my piece of wood. So the areas where there was no paint really soak up the antiquing wax, and I've made sure to enhance those nails and some of the cracks in the wood. I want this to look even older and rustier. So I'm going to take some of the black paint again, and I'm just going to feather that into areas where I randomly think rust might have collected or started. Most of this is just going to wipe away, and it'll just leave very tiny areas of rust. Once that was dry, I just had to mount it to my board. So I'm measuring it along the bottom of the tin from side to side to ensure I've got the right width to place my Jenga blocks. I've marked where they need to go, and I'm putting 2 screws in each block so that it doesn't move when I put my little nails in. I've also put 2 holes in the top of my board for a rope to go through to hang. I've lined up my tin, and I'm going to put the nails in at an angle towards each other so that they grip tightly. Then I'll just paint the nail heads black to hide them. I'm taking some rustic looking rope, and I'm just going to thread that through the holes in the top, and I'm going to tie the knots at the front of the board just so that it sits nice and flat against the wall when you hang it. You can put garden tools in this, dried flowers or a plant. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, but I absolutely love the old age charm of this. For the next tin, I'm using some metallic acrylic copper paint. Now this one doesn't say it's exterior, but it is extremely hard wearing. I know this because it's hard to get off my brushes and my paint palettes when I try to wash it off. I'm giving it 2 very light coats just so that some of that black just peeks through. Remember to wash your brush immediately after using this paint, because if it dries on your brush you will not get it off. I'll use the same kind of paper for the label on this one, but I'm going to wet it first because I want to paint it in this turquoise colour. And the water's just going to help me to thin that paint out. If I was to paint this just with the straight paint, it would turn into cardboard and it wouldn't decoupage as well onto the front of my tin. I'll use another one of my little French labels. This one's referring to lavender and the other one was referring to plants. I should have mentioned too that the turquoise paint is an exterior house paint again. And I'll take some more of my copper paint, and using that same process again, I'm going to dry brush the paint across my stencil. This time I'm going to give my label some slight highlights by adding a little bit of gold acrylic paint, and I'm just going to stipple that across the top very lightly just to make that pop. The shape of this stencil lends itself to be cut out, so I'm going to fussy cut all around the edges, leaving a few millimetres of the paper between the stencil and the edge. I think greens, turquoises and aqua blues always go well with copper. probably because copper will take on those hues when it ages. So I'm just going to water down a little bit of that turquoise blue, and I'm going to put it in strategic places where it might have aged naturally on the tin. I'll spray on some more water and I'll let it drip and fade off in places. I'm just adding and removing some of the tissue if I think I need to until I'm happy with the way it looks. I'm going to add some more highlights to the tin, just with a little bit more of that gold paint, and I'm rubbing it on my finger and just applying it randomly. I love this copper look, it's very steampunk. It didn't take very long to dry at all, so I'm going to apply my label using the same decoupage method with PVA wood glue. To get a grungier effect on this, you could use the cinnamon method as well. You could add a little bit more black around those darker edges. And you could add some darker greens and darker blues in the same spray method that I was using. The board I'm mounting this on, I found about 2 meters from the last one that I used, so probably came from the same place. It looks like it had snapped in the middle, and that's why those edges are lovely and weathered down at the bottom. I put them at the bottom because I wanted the board to look like it was just rotting away naturally. I'm putting some golden highlights around it, especially around the screw holes and the cracks, just to add some interest. Now that my board's ready to mount the tin on, I'm going to mount it fairly low on the board, and that's so that all of those lovely nail features at the top are still visible through any plant that you might put in the tin. And I'll just put the nails in the sides. These are nice and secure and will hold a lot of weight. I'll put the holes in the top and then thread the rope through to hang it. I saw this idea on Pinterest where they'd used gas and oil type cans, the much larger ones, and I just thought they were absolutely stunning. Let me know in the comments what you think of this one. The tins need to be sealed, so I'm taking this clear wax, it's a soft wax that I apply with a shaving brush, and I'll apply that all over the tin, fairly sparingly. This will make the labels in the tins water resistant, and I'm going to add 2 coats of a Rust-Oleum matte finish clear coat. You can use this indoors and outdoors, and I've seen that the water will just bead off using these 2 sealants. It's been so hot inside this summer that I'm going to hit the forest in my backyard to collect a few resources for my next project. It's so much cooler out here in the forest and so beautiful. I want to capture some of that natural feel of the forest in this project. So I'll harvest a few ferns while I'm in here. I'm ensuring I've got all of the root system. These look beautiful in pots. The other reason I'm in the forest today is I want to harvest some of this black vine. It grows all the way up into the canopy, and it's called supplejack. It's called Kariao in Māori, and it's also known as a bush asparagus, and that's because the tips taste like asparagus. I tried one and it really does taste like fresh asparagus. The berries and sap are edible too, but do not mix them up with the very poisonous tutu vine, which looks very similar. Do your research. So these wire baskets were in my rubbish pile. They've lost their linings and the hangers. I'm going to paint them in the exterior black paint. So it was very hard to film this particular project because the vines were so long and they took a bit of wrestling to weave them onto these baskets. So I'll do a photo editorial of how I made them. So I've weaved them in and out of the basket. They didn't go in and out uniformly, so I let it be pretty much a free-form exercise. And I allowed the flexibility of the vine to dictate how it came together. So here's the various stages. I got the vine as close together as possible, and I used one piece and threaded it through the sides and wove it to the bottom to secure it. I stretched the handles out in the sun with some rocks. I had a coffee sack and I'm going to cut that into 2 pieces to put inside of my baskets. You could use potato sacks for this, or some hessian if you have it lying around. I'll place those in my baskets with the print side up so that it's hidden by the plant. I'll add some sand to these because ferns like good drainage, and I'll add potting mix to the plant. Then when I hang them, I'll hang them under a really shady tree because they only like a bit of sun in the mornings and they don't like ever being dried out. All that was left to do was to trim back my sacking, and all 3 of my projects are now ready for their final reveal. Let me know what you think of them. Hey, I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you're into reducing waste and you're into reusing and recycling items, tune back into Upcycling NZ. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you here again soon. Bye from beautiful New Zealand.